It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to share a little bit of his journey to the priesthood, and kind of took a roundabout way there, but also his book and a companion journal that's available that are both really cool. Thanks for being here, Father Rob Galea.
Pleasure. So good to speak to you all the way from across the globe, literally.
Yeah, right. Yeah, basically, I think if I drilled through the earth, eventually I would get to you if I just kept on digging. But it might take a while. So you just released this journal that goes along with your book, Breakthrough, which talks about your own experience finding God and becoming a priest eventually. Can you talk a little bit about your experience growing up and how you found yourself kind of distanced from the faith?
Yeah, well, look, I was brought up on a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, which is the island of Malta. Mm-hmm. It's actually mentioned in the Bible, Acts 28. And that's a place where St. Paul was shipwrecked. And it's a very Catholic country. We attribute our Catholicism to St. Paul, but it's also, apart from its religion, it's also famous, so to speak, for its tourism, for its partying. And I was brought up in this environment, and at the age of 13, I discovered partying, and I used to go out to the nightclubs, sneak out to the nightclubs. By the time I was 14, I'd run away from home, and by the time I was 15, ended up in the drug scene and pretty lost by the time I was 16. And it was at this time where I started to hang out with gangs, and eventually there was this group of young people, this young gang that was looking for me basically to kill me. And so I found myself back home, locked in my room for 8 weeks, pretty much wanting to end my own life. And it was at this point where I had found the end of myself. That's where I had to cry out to family. I had to cry out to God, and that's where I discovered sort of my relationship with God. But still, I was far away from the priesthood. I hadn't even considered the priesthood and then I was later 21 years old. That was the first time I considered the priesthood.
So with what people might call hitting rock bottom or whatever, what was it that led you to God in that moment?
Well, having found myself in my room, I had locked myself away for about 8 weeks because these gang members were looking for me to kill me, and I was terrified, I was scared, and I was lost. And it was at this moment that even at the end of myself, where I would fall to my knees on my bed every day and just harm myself and just want to die. And later I got to write this story. I started to write this book which is now also going to be made into a movie, but this book that speaks about my depression and my anxiety. And one day I'm thinking of ways I could end my life, but I was locked in my room, feeling alone. But and as I wrote this book, I gave the chapter to my mom. I said, "Mom, I want you to read this." And she read this chapter, and the next week she called me. She lives in Malta still. I live in Australia now. And she called me and she says, "You have no idea what was going on behind those doors." She said, "I used to hear you crying. I used to hear you in pain." She said, "And you used to go and eat, and the only time you'd leave your room was to eat something. You'd go to your room, you'd fall to your knees and cry." But she said, "You know what? Every day I was on my knees outside your room. As you were on your knees wanting to die, I was on my knees crying out to a God who I knew and I know had a hope and a future for your life." And so she continued to pray, she continued to persist, and I honestly believe that I stand here as a priest, as an ordained Catholic priest, and someone who is still alive because of the persistent prayer of my mother. And she continued to pray, and she continued to think of ways that I could get out, and she organized me to go to a youth group, and the only reason I said yes to go to this youth group was because I knew that if I didn't leave my room, I would take my own life. And I didn't want that to happen, even though I had planned for that to happen. And there I found a sense of community. I found hope. I found people who were there to outreach pursue me, to love me, and to be patient with me, and even help me out of my addictions. And there I discovered this relationship with God. But still I didn't want to become a priest. I used to pray. I remember praying, God, I'll do whatever you want. I'll go around the world. I'll sing. I'll dance. But please, one condition, please don't call me to be a priest.
Well, it's such an amazing story, and also such an extreme story. Probably not everybody can relate to it, but do you think that there are experience like yours is common for young people today? Maybe not as drastic as drugs and gangs, but those feelings of loneliness and fear and depression and maybe a feeling of being lost.
Absolutely. And this is exactly what I go through in the book. You know, I take aspects that were extreme in my life, but we all go through some form of anxiety, some form of sadness, loneliness, even addiction. I go through even the book. I explain my addictions, and maybe for me it was the drugs. Maybe it was eventually stealing, and it was a whole lot of things. But there are so many things that we can get addicted to without us even knowing. And so even in this book, like, I journey through with young people, helping them, and also not only young people, but also parents, mothers, fathers who are praying for their children. How do you pray for your child? How do you persist? How do you keep on? Even my mom used to pray for me, and whenever she prayed, it seemed like things were getting worse, not better. Right. But she continued to pray. She continued to persist. She continued to cry out to God, and she believed that God would have the last say. And this is where my conversion started. Then comes the discernment path. You know, I had a relationship for 4 years, and I was I was considering marriage eventually. But one day I was giving a concert. I'm also a musician, and I was giving a concert in Italy. And as I was playing, this priest walked in. And I don't remember much about that meeting, but I remember thinking, this guy is so cool. If I'll be anything like this guy, I'll consider being a priest. Huh. And that was the first time God put his foot in the door for me to open my heart to the priesthood. And eventually I did enter the seminary and never looked back. And it's just been one of the most wonderful vocations I've had. But I've spent the rest of my life, the whole of my life, reaching out to young people since. Yeah. Even now, reaching out this year alone, I got to speak to over, if you count World Youth Day, 1.7 million teenagers. But usually it's about 400,000 to 600,000 teenagers every year. Because we're all in desperate need of hope, no matter where we are, no matter what we've been through.
So what is your message to young people, especially those that are kind of struggling with faith?
Well, I'd say, first of all, it comes down to relationship with God, knowing that we are loved by a personal God, not an abstract God, not a God who is distant, but a God who's actually interested in our lives, but also has a plan for our lives, a plan for us to be happy, to be prosperous, to live life to the full. Jeremiah 29, verse 11, it says that God has this incredible plan for our lives. The thing is, we need to respond to God. We need to walk with God. We need to have this relationship with God. And the thing is, God's hands are long enough to reach us, even in the darkest, even in the most unpromising places. And I honestly believe that if God can take my mess and turn it into a message, he can do it with anyone. And I even throughout the book, I explained just how bad I was, not because I want to show off, look how bad I was, but to say if God can take that mess and make some kind of message out of it, he surely can do it with you. He can do it with your children. He can do it with those you are praying for.
Yeah. We're talking with Father Rob Galea. The book he's talking about is Breakthrough, A Journey from Desperation to Hope. It's been out for a while now, and now there's a companion journal called Breakthrough, the Companion Journal, that goes along with this. And it looks so good. It's well done. And it has all of these like full page quotes that are well designed. Like there's the one that from Jeremiah that you were just quoting earlier. And so somebody could just take that quote and rip it out and hang it up on their wall and have it as a reminder. But also kind of walks you through a lot of the different topics that you talk about in the book and quotes from the book, and invites people to reflect on them and jot down some ideas and answers to them. Why did you want to put together this journal?
Well, I think what a journal does is it allows us to take it to another level, to apply it to our own lives. It's too easy to look at a book and see it as somebody else's story, but how does that story become my story? How can I apply it to my life? How can I let God work through this story in my life? And so this journal is a reflection journal. It's a prayer journal. It's a school journal. You know, even during some schools use it during their religious education classes. How can we take that and allow it to become my story?
And can you talk about some of the different reflections that you have in the journal, maybe some of the different writing prompts or prayer prompts?
Yeah. So from the book, for example, I talk about my journey of dialoguing with my family and how difficult it is to sometimes communicate with family. And so through this, I take the reader through questions on where they stand in their relationship to their family and how they can journey with God to a better dialogue with the family and also better relationship with the family, knowing that they are ultimately loved and cared for, that that family, very often as teenagers, can see parents as an obstacle to their call to greatness, as opposed to someone who is there to help them towards greatness. And so we journey through that. We journey through, like you said, Jeremiah 29:11. What is God's plan for my life? How can I discover it? And we go through steps as well on how to discover God's will and God's purpose for my life.
What age range is this for?
Well, the book goes from parents to grandparents. I've had 90-year-olds and plus reading the book and sending feedback, and then also 13, 14-year-olds as well. So it's a big range, but the journal is targeted towards teenagers, let's say from 13 to maybe 18 or so. And so that's because that somehow is the most impressionable age that we need to personalize. We need to take this information and not just see it as a story, but something that impacts me as a human being.
Yeah, and so many practical things in here as well. One of the things that I liked, and I've heard of ACTS, ACTS, as adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication, as a kind of a prompt for your prayer. And you add something that I haven't heard before, two more S's at the end, silence and scripture, which is such a great thing to add to that. And so you invite people to reflect on that: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication, silence, and scripture, as you're sitting down for some silent time in prayer, no matter how much time you have. And those are different things that you can think about, meditate, and pray, and have that conversation with God, and including some silence in there as well. Such practical things to help us in our prayer. Where can people get a copy of the book and a copy of the journal?
Well, the book and the journal are available from Amazon or Ave Maria Press. It's published by Ave Maria, so Ave Maria have a website and they sell their stuff. And my website also, frgministry.com. It's available at any bookstore as well, Barnes & Nobles, wherever they look, they'll find it.
All right. Again, it's called Breakthrough, A Journey from Desperation to Hope, and then also Breakthrough, the Companion Journal. Thank you so much, Father Rob Galea, for joining us today and sharing this with us. Appreciate it.